Hey, it's Ulysses for Beginners. In this episode, I'm going to be asking, why is Ulysses a hard book? I'm Adam Savage. What is it that makes it so difficult? So there's a lot of issues with Ulysses that make it a challenge, but I would say there's two minor difficulties, and then there's some major or larger obstacles to handle. So let's get past the minor issues first. And these are just, textual choices that Joyce made in how he wants his book to look. So in standard English literature, British literature at the time, when you would talk in quotations, you would use single quotes. In American English, we use double quotes. But Joyce chose to use something slightly different, a little more like French style almost. He has a dash at the beginning. So just when you see that dash, just understand it's a quotation, and I think that'll help you with a lot of the text and how it looks. So that's an initial difficulty, but that's very small. A second issue is how Joyce will sometimes combine a series of words into one word and make a new word. I mean, it's not really that different from how English itself develops. Like a lot of times when we have a long word, like I'm trying to think of an example, maybe undertaker. I don't know the etymology of undertaker, but I'm guessing initially it was maybe written as two words, undertaker, and then maybe hyphenated, and then they just stuck it together. I could be wrong about that, but there's other words where that's how the typical development for words will happen. They'll be separate, then hyphenated, or they'll just smash them together. And Joyce does that all the time in Ulysses, whenever he wants to. I'm going to give you an example on page 229 in my edition. He begins a paragraph. He goes, 5 tall white-hatted sandwich men. So tall white-hatted, that's typically 3 words in English. Tall, white-hatted, or maybe white-hatted would be hyphenated. But he just makes it one word, no hyphens, no explanation. And you're not going to find that in any dictionary, obviously, but it just looks a little unusual when you first see it. It's similar to, I think German does something like that. It has a little more flexibility in how you can combine words together. And it's not rocket science. Those are the two minor obstacles. Get past those, and then we'll start looking at the deeper issues of Ulysses. And I think by far the biggest obstacle is that there are simply so many references to all these things that Joyce knew and understood and expects his reader to kind of navigate and figure out somehow. And it's very frustrating when he just drops in all these references to history, arts, the occult, music, you name it, languages. He spoke a lot of languages, and sometimes he'll just dive into Italian, French, Latin, and so on. And he just expects you to figure it out. And, most people, they expect a little more guidance, a little more help from an author. Joyce does not give you that. You need help. So, by far, the book that I most strongly recommend is Ulysses Annotated. There's 2 editions. This is the 2nd edition, so I would recommend get the newer edition. I believe there may also be online annotations. If there are, if I can find them, I'll link in the information for this video. I think there's also, Joyce has a different way of understanding a novel. He was a poet in some sense. He wrote a few books of poetry, but I don't think he was very successful in terms of, if you read his poems, I don't find them very satisfying. I think there were much better poets at the time and before and after. That wasn't his strength, but as a novelist, he uses the poetic voice. He writes in a way that he expects you to read the book again and again to get deeper meaning out of it. So in that sense, he is a poet. He includes some poetry in the book, but for the most part, his poems, his poetry is how he just writes sentences together. So he's not using, rhyme or anything like that. Although he does employ pretty much every form of literature in the book that you can think of. But understand that this is a book that you want to go back to many times. Every time you go back to, you'll find a little more and it gets richer. So in that sense, it's a little different from a standard novel. He wants you to fully explore it, be with the book, and take it with you throughout your life. It's going to have different meanings. And the more you study it, and you may need to study it, the more you're going to get out of it, simply. So slow down. If you find a sentence particularly difficult, that's my advice. Just slow down, read it slowly, use the annotations, use the dictionary, whatever, and really try and understand each sentence. And don't breeze through this book. This is not a book you fly through. You could probably read it in a week or less if you want to, but take your time and just try to enjoy each step of the process. I have my own theory and idea about why Joyce writes like this and makes his book, I guess, a little confusing, you know? And I think that's because I'm sure like Aristotle or Plato have wrote about what the purpose of art is and how it's like a mirror to life and to show the deepest aspects of life. And I think that's what Joyce is trying to do. He's making in his book something that is closer to life than any other book that I know of. Maybe Finnegan's Wake includes more of reality than Ulysses, but Ulysses is a pretty good mirror for life. And what I mean by that is that when you think of life, or no, let me take a step back. When you think of realistic novels, I would argue that a lot of that realism is not very real because life includes fantastic elements. It includes humor, romance. There's a great quote by Alan Moore. Maybe I'll find it and put it here if I can. And I think that's what life is. It has room for all these different elements. And when you come into life, you need guidance. You need help. You're not. It's not self-explanatory. You need, parents, friends, teachers to help you with life and understand it. And I think that's a similar situation that Joyce has created with Ulysses and with Finnegan's Wake. It's a book that you should get help, talk with other people about it, and try to come to a collective understanding of what it means. And I think when you look at realistic novels, I just want to throw up because they're so limited in what they show life to be. And life has all these amazing, unusual things that you may understand a lot of life, but there's going to be confusing elements. There's going to be things that are always going to be in your mind and say you're still trying to figure out as riddles. And Joyce includes plenty of riddles in Ulysses. You will find, I'll talk more about them in the future. But that's, I think that these different levels of understanding, there's very obvious parts that are very clear and there's very confusing parts. And that's just, that variety is what I love about Ulysses. Another challenge is a lot of interior monologues. I think we're a little more accustomed to it nowadays. We've seen it in so many movies, voiceovers, and a lot of books. But at the time, such deep and sustained interior monologues was a little unusual, and sometimes the transitions and thoughts of the characters, Joyce assumes that you are familiar, or he kind of wants it to be natural, so he lets it follow the natural course of events in a person's mind. You're not going to explain things to yourself that you would explain to others. So when we're inside a person's mind, it's not always going to be clear what's going on at first, but just stick with it. Use the annotations if you need to, or even if you don't need to, because a lot of times you'll think you'll understand what's going on, but then you look and there's some reference to some poem or some book or some historical event that you didn't even know about. There's all kinds of stuff hidden in the text, and sussing that out is part of the joy of the experience.